The wind never truly stopped. It was the first and last voice of the Arizona-New Mexico territory, a constant whisper that moved the red dust from one desolate ridge to another. It scoured the raw lumber of Silver Mesa, a town built on a defiant spit of hope and a rumor of silver. The town had the silver, but the hope was running as low as the water. At the center of the main street, a wide, rutted track of powdered earth, stood the community well. Its wooden frame was bleached gray. The bucket, when it was lowered, scraped the bottom with a hollow, thirsty sound. The sound was a punctuation mark at the end of every anxious conversation. It was a symbol of scarcity, and where there was scarcity, greed soon followed, growing fat and bold. The stagecoach buckled and swayed, fighting the ruts, before finally pulling to a halt in a cloud of its own making. The dust, thick as velvet, settled slowly. Evelyn Hart waited until the other passengers, two drummers with sweat-stained hats and a silent woman clutching a birdcage, had disembarked. She gathered her valise, smoothed the front of her plain gray traveling dress, and stepped down onto the loose planks of the boardwalk. She felt the eyes of the town upon her. They were not hostile, not yet, but they were deeply curious. A woman, alone, arriving from the east. She wore the severe, practical clothing of a governess or a tutor, a deliberate costume meant to make her invisible, unremarkable. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it ached at her temples, but her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were not the eyes of a simple tutor. They were sharp, analytical, and they missed nothing. They recorded the saloon, the general store, the land office with its peeling paint, and the new and imposing brick office of the Silver Mesa Mining and Railroad Company. Evelyn Hart had not traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to teach arithmetic and piano. She was a journalist, an independent investigator, though she would never use such a grand title. She was a seeker of truths, and she had come to Silver Mesa following a trail of whispers, a trail of stolen land and broken treaties that all led to one man, Boone Carver. She had her story prepared, a position as a private tutor for a local merchant. It was a lie, crafted with care, just plausible enough to grant her entry. Her true tools were not primers and chalk, but a small notebook, a keen mind, and a resolve that had been forged in the drawing rooms of Boston, where she had watched powerful men in fine suits casually ruin the lives of others with the stroke of a pen. This time, the pen was hers. Her valise, heavy in her hand, held the evidence she had gathered so far. Maps, letters, clippings. She was here to find the final proof. The link between Boone Carver's railroad and the systematic choking of the land, the diversion of water, the intimidation of anyone who stood in his path. She walked toward the town's only respectable boarding house, her back straight, her expression neutral. The wind tugged at her bonnet, trying to unmask her. She felt the grit on her teeth. She was a long way from home, playing a game she did not fully understand, in a land that would kill a person for a single mistake. Miles away, in the labyrinth of stone and shadow known as Coyote Pass, Keaton Blackhorse Yazzie felt the same wind. He tasted it, not as an intrusion, but as a message. It told him the air was dry, that the storm building in the west would be more dust than rain. It told him they were close to the open flats. He rode at the head of a small, tired wagon, a family from Illinois, their faces cracked by the sun, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fragile determination. He had agreed to guide them through this last, dangerous stretch. He was Dine, or Navajo, as the white men called his people. He had once been a scout for the cavalry, a job that had taught him the white man's way of war and left a bitter taste in his soul. Now, he lived in the space between. He did not belong to the town of Silver Mesa, and he was regarded with suspicion by some of his own people near the Red Rock Agency. He was a man of the land, belonging only to the earth beneath his horse's hooves. He raised a hand, a simple, fluid motion. The wagon behind him creaked to a halt. The father, a man named Josiah, looked at him with nervous inquiry. Keaton swung down from his horse. He did not look like a soldier. He wore practical canvas trousers and a worn cotton shirt. A knife was sheathed at his belt, and a Winchester rifle rested in the scabbard on his saddle. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, making almost no sound on the rocky ground. He knelt, studying the earth. His eyes, dark and perceptive, scanned the tracks. He saw what Josiah did not, the marks of shod horses. 6 of them passed this way not 3 hours prior. They were not wandering. They rode with purpose, their horses digging deep. The coyote spurs. The name hung in the air of the territory, a synonym for trouble. They were hired guns, and everyone knew they worked for Boone Carver, doing the man's dirty work, clearing settlers and dine alike from land the railroad desired. Red Jack Mercer, their leader, was a man said to have no soul at all. Keaton rose. He did not speak of the tracks. Fear was a useless burden. "We will rest here," he said. His voice was low, calm. "The horses need water." Josiah looked around at the baked red rock and stunted juniper. "There is no water here, Mr. Yazzie." Keaton walked to a sheer wall of sandstone, a place anyone else would have overlooked. He knelt again, pulling aside a curtain of dry brush. There, hidden in a cleft, was a small, dark patch of damp sand. He took a cup from his belt and pressed it into the spot, waiting patiently as brown, gritty water slowly seeped in. He did this again and again, emptying the cup into a canvas bucket, his movements unhurried. He was a man who understood patience, who knew the land would provide, if you knew how to ask. Later, as the sun began to dip, painting the clouds in violent strokes of orange and purple, a young deer appeared on a distant ridge. It was a silhouette against the dying light. The family was low on provisions. Keaton lifted the rifle. It felt like an extension of his arm. He did not hurry. He breathed out, his body still. The report of the shot was sharp, a single crack that echoed and then was swallowed by the canyon. The deer dropped. It was a clean shot, precise, honorable. He took no pleasure in the kill, only a quiet acknowledgement of the necessity. When they reached the edge of the flats, Silver Mesa was a collection of dark shapes in the twilight, its few lamps just beginning to flicker like captured stars. Keaton stopped his horse. "You will be safe from here," he said. "Follow this track straight. It will take you to the town." Josiah, his face etched with gratitude, reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather purse. He counted out the agreed-upon fee, then pressed several extra coins into his hand. "For the water, for the meat. You are a good man, Mr. Yazzie." Keaton looked at the extra coins in his palm. Then he calmly picked out the exact fee they had agreed upon and handed the rest back to the startled man. "I took you through the pass." Keaton said, "That was the bargain." He did not wait for another reply. He turned his horse, a powerful black animal that moved with the same quiet strength as its rider, and nudged it into a soft trot, disappearing back into the shadows of the mesas. He was an outsider, bound by his own code. From the window of her small room in the boarding house, Evelyn Hart watched the single wagon approach the town. It was too dark to see much, but she noted the family, their exhausted relief, and she saw, for a brief moment, the figure who had guided them, a man on a dark horse, who sat apart, watching the town but not entering it. He was native, she was certain. He carried himself with a profound stillness, a visible separation from the settlers he had guided. He was another piece of the puzzle, a variable, not one of Carver's men. That was plain. He looked like a man who made his own rules. The background conflict was palpable. Evelyn had heard it in the whispers at the general store, the way men avoided the topic of the railroad, the tension between the federal agencies, understaffed and overwhelmed, and the railroad, which acted with the authority of a sovereign nation, was a quiet war. And caught in that war were the Dine communities near the Red Rock Agency, their traditional lands and water sources being systematically cut off. Boone Carver was building an empire, and he would not let treaties or lives stand in his way. The wind howled, rattling the glass in Evelyn's window frame. A full dust storm, born of the high desert, slammed into Silver Mesa. The world outside her window vanished in a churning cloud of red. She quickly shut the pane, but the fine, gritty powder was already on the sill, on her valise, on her tongue. Far out in the desert, Keaton Blackhorse Yazzie did not seek shelter. He turned his face to the wind, letting the dust sting his skin. He understood this storm. It was the land, crying out. It was an echo of the greed that was choking the wells dry. The storm would pass, but the other storm, the one brought by men like Boone Carver, was just beginning. 3 days after her arrival, Evelyn Hart was on the move again. She had secured her cover story, presenting her credentials from Boston to a merchant who was happy to have his children educated by a woman of such refinement. She had also, through polite inquiries at the general store, learned the schedule for the supply wagon running essential goods to the dine school at the Red Rock Agency. She offered her services as a volunteer to help deliver a box of donated primers she claimed to have brought with her. The wagon driver, a man named Silas, was grateful for the company. They left Silver Mesa under a pale, hot sky, the 2 wagon mules leaning into their collars. The wagon bed was loaded with sacks of flour, bolts of cloth, and crates of chalk and books. It was a mission of peace, but in this territory, peace was a fragile thing. Dry River Ford was a deceptive name. It was not a river, but a wide, sandy scar in the earth, 100 yards across, flanked by eroded dunes and sandstone bluffs. The tracks led down a steep bank, across the flat, sun-baked sand, and up the opposite side. It was a natural bottleneck, a perfect place for an ambush. They were halfway across when the first shot rang out. The sound was flat, swallowed by the sand. Silas grunted, the wagon reins falling from his hands. He slumped forward, a dark stain spreading on his back. The mules brayed in terror. Evelyn screamed, diving for the floorboards of the wagon as more shots erupted from the bluffs above them. Men on horseback poured down the sandy banks. They were rough, their faces obscured by dusty bandanas. The coyote spurs. They surrounded the wagon, their rifles trained on her. One of them, a thick-set man with cruel eyes, dismounted and stalked toward her. He was not Red Jack Mercer, but one of his lieutenants. He grabbed Evelyn by the arm and hauled her roughly from the wagon bed. She landed hard on the sand. He ignored the flour and the supplies, his eyes scanning the contents of the wagon. He seemed to be looking for something. Another man shouted, pointing at her valise, the one she had guarded so closely since Boston. It had fallen beside her. The man who held her shoved her away and grabbed the bag. He fumbled with the latch. Evelyn's heart stopped. Inside that valise were her notes, her maps of the water sources, her entire investigation linking Boone Carver to the land seizures. If they found that, she was dead. She scrambled to her feet, shouting at him that it was just personal items, primers for the children. The man backhanded her, sending her sprawling again. He was not interested in her explanation. He was focused on the lock. A sound, a sharp whistle like a hawk, cut through the air. One of the men on the bluff clutched his chest and fell from his horse. The other men spun, confused, raising their rifles. They could see no one. Keaton Blackhorse Yazzie had been tracking this group for 2 days, ever since he found their tracks near a spring they had fouled. He had watched them set the ambush. He was lying flat on a dune 100 yards away, the color of the earth, his Winchester steady. He fired again. Another man dropped. The remaining raiders panicked. They could not find their target. Their leader shouted, pointing toward the wagon, telling his men to burn it and find the papers. This was the moment Keaton had waited for. He rose to one knee and fired not at the men, but at the ground near the hooves of their horses, which were tethered loosely to a dead cottonwood. The bullets kicked up sand, spooking the animals. The horses tore free and bolted, galloping in terror. They ran directly toward the edge of the riverbed, toward a patch of dark, damp-looking sand that anyone else would have avoided. The raiders, focused on their escaping mounts, ran after them on foot. They hit the soft sand and sank immediately. It was not true quicksand, but a deep, sticky mire hidden by a crust of dry silt. The men cursed, their boots swallowed, their movements becoming slow and desperate. They were trapped, exposed. Keaton moved then, not like a soldier, but like a predator. He descended the dune, his horse following his call, and mounted in one fluid motion. He rode down into the ford, his rifle now resting in the crook of his arm. He did not charge. He approached with lethal calm. The men in the sand trap struggled, trying to raise their rifles. Keaton did not shoot them. He fired into the sand just in front of them, the bullets whining. They dropped their weapons, their hands raised high. The man who had taken Evelyn's valise was the only one still free. He saw his men trapped and his horses gone. He dropped the bag, his mission forgotten, and scrambled up the far bank, disappearing into the rocks. Keaton dismounted and walked toward the wagon. He first checked on Silas. The man was gone. Keaton covered him gently with a canvas sheet. Then he turned to Evelyn. She was on her knees, clutching the valise to her chest. Her face was pale beneath a smear of dust, but her eyes were alive, sharp and defiant. There was no terror in them now, only a cold, assessing intelligence. Keaton stood over her, a tall, imposing figure against the harsh light. He asked if she was harmed. Evelyn pulled herself to her feet, brushing sand from her dress. She clutched the bag. She told him thank you, that he had saved her life. She was just a tutor. She explained, bringing books to the school. She did not know why they would attack. Keaton's gaze was unsettling. It was not hostile, but it was deep. He seemed to look right through her. He knelt and picked up a leather satchel one of the raiders had dropped. He opened it. It contained no money, no valuables, only a stack of shipping manifests and land office papers, all related to the Red Rock Agency. He looked from the papers to Evelyn, then to the valise she held so tightly. He knew the coyote spurs. They were thieves and bullies, but they were not random killers. They did not attack wagons for flour and chalk, and they did not risk a fight like this for a tutor's books. He understood. They were not here to rob. They were here to find something like the papers he held, or perhaps something like the papers she concealed. He did not challenge her story. He simply nodded. He told her it was not safe to continue to the agency. He would take her and the wagon back to Silver Mesa. He righted the wagon, cut one mule free from its harness to serve as a saddle horse for her, and tied Silas's body securely in the back. He handled the grim task with a quiet, efficient respect that touched Evelyn. The ride back to town was silent and heavy. Keaton rode ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges. Evelyn followed on the mule, her body aching, her mind racing. She had failed to get to the agency, and she had exposed herself. Halfway back, Keaton stopped. He dismounted by a small waterhole, one of the few public springs used by travelers. The air around it was foul. A dead steer lay on its side near the bank, its body bloated. Keaton knelt, studying the water. He did not need to taste it. The chemical smell told him everything. It was poisoned. This was not drought. This was war. When their small, grim procession reached Silver Mesa, the townspeople gathered, their faces tight with fear. The sight of the bullet-riddled wagon and the body in the back sent a wave of panic through the street. Sheriff Miller emerged from his office. He was a tall man who looked like he had been worn down, like a stone in a river. He removed his hat, his expression troubled. He listened to Evelyn's account, his eyes shifting uneasily. He looked at Keaton, who stood apart, silent by his horse. The sheriff promised a full investigation. He said he would send a wire to the territorial marshal. He would send a patrol out to Dry River Ford. But Evelyn, who had watched countless politicians and compromised officials in Boston, recognized the hollow ring of his words. His gaze kept drifting to the large brick building of the Silver Mesa Mining and Railroad Company. She knew then that Boone Carver owned this man. The investigation would go nowhere. Keaton did not wait for the sheriff to finish. He had delivered the living and the dead. His job was done. He turned his horse and rode away from the town. Evelyn, exhausted and bruised, walked toward her boarding house. She needed to wash, to think, to find another way. She passed the town well, the source of life for Silver Mesa. The small stream that fed it was running dangerously low. And there, hammered into the muddy bank just above the intake, was a new, raw wooden sign. The stenciled black paint was still fresh. It read, "Private property, Boone Carver, no trespassing." The town's water was no longer the town's. The final, quiet shot had been fired. The attack at Dry River Ford had ripped the veil from Silver Mesa. Fear, once a low whisper, was now a sickness in the air. Boone Carver, however, chose this precise moment to demonstrate his power, not with guns, but with whiskey and chandeliers. He hosted a grand reception in his newly completed railroad office. The brick building was the largest in town, a fortress of commerce, and tonight it blazed with light. Lanterns hung from the new porch, and through the tall glass windows, anyone on the dusty street could see the elite of the territory: cattle barons, mining investors, and nervous politicians who had traveled all the way from the capital. Carver was a master of performance. He was a broad man, dressed in a fine wool suit from St. Louis, his vest barely containing his confidence. He moved through the crowd with a predator's easy grace, his voice a warm, reasonable boom that invited trust and promised wealth. "Prosperity, gentlemen," he announced, raising a glass of bourbon. "That is what we bring. Not just a railroad, but a future. Order out of chaos." Evelyn Hart stood near the back of the crowded room, her presence as a tutor having secured her an invitation. She held a glass of lemonade, her knuckles white. She watched the ranchers, men with faces burned by the sun and worry, listen to Carver's seductive poison. "I know the drought has been hard," Carver continued, his tone turning sympathetic. "Water is life, and I mean to share that life. My railroad, my mines. We need this valley to thrive." He smiled, a generous, paternal expression. "Which is why I make this pledge tonight. Any man who partners with the Silver Mesa Mining and Railroad Company, who sells his holdings to us so we may consolidate the future, will receive free and permanent water rights for his personal homestead. We will build the flumes. We will dig the wells. You will have your water. Gentlemen, guaranteed." A murmur went through the crowd. It was the offer of salvation. Evelyn saw the greed in some eyes, the desperate, agonizing calculation in others. She knew what he was doing. He was offering them back the very water he was actively stealing from the public trust. In exchange for their land, their birthright, he was fencing the open range, and they were thanking him for it. She saw Sheriff Miller standing near the door, his face grim. He held a glass but did not drink. His eyes met Evelyn's for a brief, uncomfortable moment before he looked away. This was her chance. The entire town's power structure was in this room, distracted by bourbon and false hope. Now, if ever, she could find the proof she needed. With a faint look of discomfort from the heat and the smoke, Evelyn slipped out of the main hall into the quiet, dark corridor. The building was silent, the thick walls muffling the party. Carver's personal office was at the end of the hall. The door was new, the varnish still smelling sweet. It was locked. She had anticipated this. From a small pocket hidden in the seam of her dress, she removed a long, thin metal hairpin. She was a journalist from Boston, but she had learned that investigation in the West required more than a sharp pencil. She probed the simple lock. It was designed to stop a casual thief, not a determined woman. After a long, tense 30 seconds, the mechanism clicked. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her, leaving only a sliver of light from the hall. The room was dark, dominated by a massive oak desk and the faint moonlight coming through the window. She did not light a lamp. She moved quickly. The safe was in the corner, a black iron cube, cold and silent. The safe was a standard make, probably a simple 3-number combination. She looked at the desk. Carver was arrogant, and arrogant men were careless. In the top drawer of the desk, beneath a stack of letterhead, was a small leather-bound ledger. Tucked inside the cover was a slip of paper. Not a name, just a sequence of 3 numbers. 10, 45, 22. She repeated them in her mind, burning them into her memory. 10, 45, 22. She would not risk opening it tonight. But there was something else. On the desk itself, not yet filed away, was a stack of contracts. She held one up to the faint moonlight. It was a deed of transfer for a small ranch bordering the Blue Spring. She looked for the signature. It was not a signature. It was a thumbprint, a dark, greasy smudge pressed onto the page with such force it had nearly torn the paper. Below it, another and another. She found a dozen contracts, all for properties vital to water access, and not one of them was signed. They were all marked by those same desperate, forced thumbprints. This was it. This was the proof of coercion, the link between Carver and the violent intimidation. A floorboard creaked in the hall. Evelyn froze. She did not panic. She looked at the door, then at the window. The door was a trap. The window was the only way. She moved to it, unlatched it, and pushed it open. It opened onto a narrow, dark alley that separated the railroad office from the back of the mercantile. She hiked up her skirts and climbed out, dropping the few feet to the ground. She landed softly in the dust and leaned against the brick wall, her heart hammering. She thought she was safe. "You're a long way from the party, Miss Hart." The voice was like gravel in a tin cup. A large shadow detached itself from the opposite wall. Red Jack Mercer. He had not been inside. He had been watching the building from the darkness. He was Carver's hound. He stepped into the sliver of moonlight, and Evelyn felt a cold, true fear. This was not one of his subordinates. This was the man himself. His eyes were pale, his face scarred. He wore 2 guns, tied low. He had seen her at the Dry River Ford ambush. "Or perhaps you are not Miss Hart, the tutor," he sneered, moving to block the end of the alley. "Maybe you are just a common thief." "I was feeling faint," Evelyn said, her voice shaking only slightly. "I needed air." "This alley ain't air," Red Jack said, taking another step toward her. He was enjoying this. "Mr. Carver, he does not like people in his private office. He does not like people who ask too many questions. And he really does not like survivors of ambushes." He was 3 steps from her. She was trapped. The wall was at her back. "She is not alone. Jack." The voice came from above. Evelyn looked up. On the low roof of the mercantile, Keaton Black Horse Yazzie stood outlined against the deep, starry sky. He seemed to have materialized from the night itself. Red Jack froze. He looked up, his hand hovering near his gun. "Black Horse, you are getting to be a pest. This is railroad business. It does not concern you." "She is with me," Keaton said. His voice was calm, conversational, but it held a quality that cut through the night. "This is not your fight." "Everything in this town is my fight," Red Jack spat. "By order of Mr. Carver." "Go home, Jack. The party is over." Red Jack's hand twitched. "Maybe I take you both." Keaton looked at Evelyn. He pointed to a stack of empty crates piled against the mercantile wall. "Up, now!" Evelyn did not hesitate. She scrambled up the crates as Red Jack made his move, pulling his gun. Keaton leaned down. He did not offer a hand. He seized her wrist. His grip was like iron. He hauled her bodily onto the roof in one powerful, fluid motion. A shot exploded in the alley, the bullet splintering the wood where Evelyn had been seconds before. "Run," Keaton ordered. They ran across the flat, tarred roof. The alley at the far end was a dark chasm. The next building, the land office, was a story higher, its roof pitched and covered in red clay tiles. It was an impossible jump. Keaton pointed to a narrow plank that someone had once laid across the gap, probably for repairs. It was their only bridge. He went first, crossing it as easily as if it were a wide street. Evelyn followed, her breath tight in her chest. She reached the other side, stepping onto the slanted, treacherous roof. Her leather-soled shoe met the dusty tile. She slipped. A small cry escaped her as she began to slide, faster and faster, toward the edge. The street was 2 stories below, a dark, unforgiving strip of dirt. Keaton moved like a cat. He dropped, grabbing her, his arm locking around her waist like a steel band. Her slide stopped. Her body slammed against his. They were plastered to the slanted roof, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would break. She could feel the solid, calm strength of his chest, smell the faint, clean scent of sage and desert air on his clothes. The noise of Carver's party was a distant, mocking violin. "I have you," he whispered. His voice was rough. He helped her up, guiding her over the peak of the roof. They dropped into the next alley, this one quiet and safe, ending on the main street. Evelyn leaned against the brick, breathing hard, pushing her hair back from her face. She was angry, terrified, and profoundly alive. "That," she panted, "was not a coincidence. You were watching me. You were watching Carver's office." Keaton stood in the shadows, not touching her, but close. "I was watching Carver. You are the one who climbed out his window." She turned on him, her fear turning to fire. "What is your game in this? Who are you? I saw you take the settlers' money, but you refused a tip. You saved me at the ford, and you saved me now, but you stay in the shadows. Which side are you on?" "Keaton." He stepped closer. The moonlight touched the high planes of his face. His dark eyes held hers. "I am not on the white man's side. I am not on the railroad side. I am not even on the agency's side." His voice was low, intense. "I am on the side of this land. I am on the side of the truth. They are the same thing." Evelyn felt the sincerity of it, a bedrock of conviction she had not felt in anyone since she left Boston. "Then we are on the same side." "Be careful. Evelyn Hart," he said, using her full name for the first time. "Carver's men saw you at the wagon. Red Jack has seen you now. Your story of being a tutor is over. You are a target." Before she could reply, he was gone. He did not walk away. He simply stepped back into the deeper shadows and vanished. The next morning, the news spread like a brush fire. It came from a messenger from the Red Rock Agency. A judge in the territorial capital, a man known to be in Carver's pocket, had signed an emergency injunction. Blue Spring, the primary water source for the Dine families living north of the agency, was now the legal, private property of the Silver Mesa Mining and Railroad Company. The news was a death sentence, but it was the addendum that stopped Keaton's heart. A group of Dine children, walking the public road toward the agency school, had been met by a patrol of Carver's men. They were not simply told to turn back. The men had raised their rifles, a clear and silent message of what would happen if they took one more step. The children had fled. Keaton found Evelyn at the boarding house. He did not waste time on greetings. "The children," he said. "They must get to the school. It is the only future they have. The main road is blocked. I am taking them through the Canyon of Wind." Evelyn knew that canyon by reputation. It was a long, treacherous detour. "Carver will not follow you there." "No," Keaton agreed. "It is a hard ride. It will take 3 days." Evelyn looked down at her hands. Her cover was gone. Her investigation was stalled. Red Jack was hunting her. The logical thing to do was to take the next stagecoach east, to safety, to publish what she already had. But she saw the smudged thumbprints on the contracts. She saw the children running in terror from raised guns. She thought of her cousin in Boston, ruined by men just like Carver. She met Keaton's gaze. "I am coming with you." He shook his head. "It is not a place for a white woman. It is not a tour." "I am not a tourist," she said, her voice hard. "I am a journalist. You said you were on the side of the truth. So am I. If those children are forced to walk through a canyon to go to school, the world is going to know about it. I am going to document it." He studied her, seeing past the Eastern dress, past the fear on the roof. He saw the steel. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Be ready by sunset." As they rode out of town hours later, two quiet figures heading toward the agency. Evelyn looked back at Silver Mesa. The sun was setting, painting the sky in blood red and fiery orange. Against that beautiful, terrible backdrop, a thick plume of black smoke was rising from the foothills near Carver's mine. It was not a campfire. It was too large, too oily. "What is that?" she asked. Keaton did not have to look. He had smelled it on the wind. "He is clearing the land," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Burning the scrub and the juniper. The railroad does not wait for trees. It does not wait for people. It only moves forward." The black smoke stained the sunset, a promise of the destruction to come. They met the children at a prearranged hollow 5 miles north of the agency. There were 7 of them, ranging in age from 6 to 12. They were quiet, their dark eyes wide, not with terror, but with a solemn, watchful gravity. They carried small bundles of their belongings. With them was a young woman, hardly more than a girl herself, named Tiana, who was their teacher at the school. She greeted Keaton with a nod of profound respect. They were brave. Tiana said simply, "They did not cry." "There is no shame in crying," Keaton replied, his voice gentle. "But there is more strength in walking. We will walk now." The Canyon of Wind was a long, winding scar through the high mesa, a path known only to the dying. It was not a place for wagons or patrols. It was a place of high, sheer walls that funneled the wind, creating a constant, moaning song. Keaton led the way, his black horse picking its way over the loose rock. The children walked, their small feet shod in worn moccasins. Evelyn walked with them, her heavy Boston skirts a clear encumbrance. After the first hour, she sat on a rock, took a small knife from her valise, and sawed at the hem of her dress, cutting the fabric away at the knee. Tiana watched her, a small, approving smile touching her lips. Evelyn ignored the sting of judgment she might have received back home. Practicality was the only virtue here. She was not a natural outdoors woman. The sun was a physical weight, and the air was so dry it cracked her lips. But she was resilient. She learned. She watched Keaton and did as he did. He was a natural leader, but not in the way of a white man. He did not bark orders. He moved among the children, showing them, not telling them. He taught them to listen to the sound of the wind. "It is not just noise," he explained, his low voice carrying to Evelyn as she walked beside a small, silent boy. "It is a map. It tells you where the walls are narrow. It tells you where the canyon opens. It tells you, before you can see it, if the weather is turning." He showed them how to conserve water, taking only a small sip, holding it, and swallowing slowly. "You drink for your body," he said, "not for your thirst." Evelyn found her role, the smallest girl, who had not said a word. Stumbled on a loose rock. She sat hard, her lip trembling. Before Keaton or Tiana could move, Evelyn was there. She did not fuss over the child. She sat on the ground, looked at the girl's scraped hands, and produced a clean linen handkerchief from her pocket. She poured a tiny, precious amount of water on it and cleaned the grit from the skin. "That was a hard fall," Evelyn said quietly, her voice calm and even. "I fell off a roof just the other night. It is a frightening thing to fall." The little girl looked up, her eyes curious. Evelyn finished tying the handkerchief loosely around the small hand. "But we are all right," Evelyn continued, "because we get up, Now, let us get up together." She stood, and after a moment, the little girl took her hand and stood with her. From that moment, Evelyn was no longer the outsider. She was part of their small, defiant procession. She helped Tiana manage the children, carrying the pack of the smallest boy, telling them stories of the big city, of buildings so tall they scraped the sky, and of carriages that ran on iron tracks without horses. On the second day, the sky turned a sick, yellowish brown. The wind, which had been their constant companion, stopped. The silence was heavy, unnatural. Keaton halted the group. He tasted the air. "Get to the wall," he said, his voice sharp with a new urgency. "Get to the low place by the riverbed. Now!" He pointed to a curve in the canyon where the dry, packed sand was lowest. "Cover your faces. Use the water." A low, humming sound began, like a million insects. Evelyn looked back. A column of dust, a solid, churning tower of red, was moving down the canyon. It was a dust devil, but larger than any she had ever imagined. A spinning, localized storm. "Down," Keaton commanded. He pushed Evelyn and the children into the hollow, pressing them against the sandstone wall. He unslung his canteen, soaked his own bandana, and gave it to Tiana, motioning for her to give it to the smallest child. Evelyn quickly followed his lead, soaking her own improvised handkerchiefs and passing them to the other children, showing them how to press the damp cloth over their mouths and noses. The storm hit them. It was not wind, it was a solid, physical thing, a wall of sand and grit that stung every inch of exposed skin and tried to suck the air from their lungs. It was blinding, suffocating, and terrifying. The noise was a deafening roar. Evelyn pressed her body over the two smallest children, her own face buried in the crook of her arm. She felt a larger form press over her. Keaton. He had thrown himself over her and the children, his body taking the worst of the scouring wind, a solid, immovable shield. It lasted for 10 minutes that felt like 10 years. Then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The world was changed. The sky was still brown, but the air was breathable. They were all covered in a thick, fine layer of red dust. Keaton pushed himself up, his back and shoulders raw from the flying debris. He checked each child, his eyes quick and assessing. They were frightened, but unharmed. Evelyn was shaking, her throat raw. She saw Keaton wince as he moved his left shoulder. A long, dark line of blood was soaking through the shoulder of his shirt, where the wind had blasted an old, raised scar. Later that night, when the children were asleep around a small, smokeless fire, Evelyn looked at him. He was tending to his horse, his back to her. He had taken his shirt off to clean it. In the firelight, she saw the scar clearly. It was not from the storm. It was old, puckered, the mark of a white man's bullet. "You were a scout," she said. It was not a question. He paused, his hands still on the horse's flank. He did not turn. "I was, for a long time." "What happened?" He turned, then his face was unreadable. "I thought I was helping my people. I thought I was showing the soldiers how to find peace, but they were not looking for peace. They were looking for control." He ran a hand over the scar. "We tracked a small band of Apache. They said they were raiders. I led them to the camp. It was not raiders. It was families, women, old men. They had left their reservation because the agent was stealing their food. They were hungry." He stopped, his voice flat. "The soldiers did not ask questions. I tried to stop them. This was my answer." He tapped the scar. "I left that night. I never went back. I learned that a uniform does not make you honorable, and a treaty does not make you safe." Evelyn looked at this man, who lived in the spaces between worlds, trusted by no one. And she understood the cold, hard anger that fueled his patience. He was not just protecting the land, he was atoning. She felt a sudden need to be just as honest. "I have a scar too," she said, though hers was not visible. Back in Boston, my cousin, James, he was a good man. Not strong, but good. He owned a small shipping company, a railroad baron, much like our Mr. Carver, wanted his wharves. James would not sell. She stared into the small fire. So, the man ruined him. He bought his debts. He bribed the dock managers. He started a rumor that James's ships were not sound. In 6 months, James was bankrupt. He lost everything. His company, his house, his good name. She looked up, her eyes hard in the firelight. I watched that man, the railroad man, smile and toast his good fortune at a charity ball, while my cousin was packing his life into a single suitcase. I vowed then that I would never be silent. I would find the truth. I would print it. I would use the one weapon I have, the one thing men like Carver fear, the press. That is why I am here. Keaton held her gaze. He did not say anything, but he gave a slow nod. An understanding passed between them, deeper than words. They were two different people, from two different worlds, fighting the same dragon. The next day, their path was blocked. A rock slide, fresh and deliberate, covered the narrow trail. Keaton studied it. This was not the wind. This was dynamite. Carver's men knew this route, or they had guessed. "We cannot go back," Tiana said, her voice tight with worry. "We will not," Keaton said. He looked up at the canyon wall. "There is another way, a harder way, but it will take us wide of their scouts." The new path led them higher, onto a desolate, wind-swept mesa. It was here, in the middle of nowhere, that Keaton found the tracks. They were not horse tracks. They were from a heavy wagon, one with a distinct, damaged wheel. A three-pronged crack in the iron rim had left a unique mark, like a bird's foot, in the dried mud. "Who would bring a wagon up here?" Evelyn asked, wiping dust from her face. "Someone who did not want to be seen." Keaton replied. He dismounted, studying the direction. The tracks led west, toward the high, dry ridges that overlooked Blue Spring. "Carver, it has to be." Evelyn's journalistic instincts were on fire. "We have to follow it." "The children," Keaton said. "We will be safe." Tiana interrupted. She pointed to a small cleft in the rocks. "We know this place. We can shelter here. Find them. Keaton, find what they are doing to our water." Keaton and Evelyn rode on, following the strange three-pronged track. It was a clear, arrogant trail of guilt. It led them for 2 miles along the ridge, until Keaton suddenly raised his hand. "Listen." Elog_female_lead listened. She heard the wind, and beneath the wind, a new sound, a rhythmic, mechanical clanking. Thump, chug, thump, chug. They dismounted, leaving the horses, and crept forward on foot. They came to the edge of the mesa and looked down. What she saw made her blood run cold. In a hidden box canyon, completely obscured from the valley below, was a new construction, a raw lumber shed, a tall smokestack puffing dark smoke, and a massive, churning steam engine. From the engine, a huge iron pipe, wide enough for a man to crawl through, ran down into the earth, aimed directly at the underground source of Blue Spring. It was a pump station, a secret, illegal pump station. Carver was not just claiming the spring on paper. He was physically stealing it, draining the aquifer from a hidden location, and she could see the line of freshly turned earth, pumping it miles away. "To the mine," she whispered, horrified. "He is pumping it all to his silver mine. He is killing the spring," Keaton said. His voice was dead, his face a mask of cold fury. When she had her gun, Evelyn thought, "This is it, Keaton. This is everything. We ride back. We go to the territorial marshal. We go to the newspapers. We have him." "No," Keaton said, grabbing her arm as she turned to run for the horses. "What do you mean, no?" she demanded, twisting in his grip. "We have proof. They cannot deny this." "You do not understand," he said, his voice low and intense. A Marshall Carver owns the Marshall, a newspaper. Your paper is in Boston. By the time that story is printed, this pump will have drained the land dry. The townspeople, they will not believe you." "They will believe this," she argued, pointing at the engine. "They will believe Carver's promise of water for their farms. They are desperate. He will tell them this pump is for them. He will lie. And they will choose his lie over our truth, because his lie offers them hope." "So what do we do?" she cried, her frustration boiling over. "We let him win." "We need more," Keaton said. "We need proof they cannot deny. Proof that wins not just the court, but the hearts of the town." He was looking past the pump, at a small, miserable-looking cluster of tents hidden behind the engine house, a work camp. "Look," he said. They moved closer, staying low. They found a pile of discarded equipment. And more. They found a partial blueprint weighted down by a rock, showing the pipeline's full, illegal route, and near a cold fire pit, they found a half-burned ledger. Evelyn smoothed the charred pages. It was not a payroll. It was a list of names, and next to them, calculations, not wages, but debts. Debts to the company store, debts for tools, debts for food. The figures were impossibly high. "This is not a payroll," Evelyn whispered, her blood running cold. "This is an indenture list. He is not paying these workers. He is trapping them. This is forced labor." They had found the second piece. Not just theft of water, but theft of men. As Evelyn carefully folded the fragile, burnt document, Keaton suddenly went still. He had not heard a sound. He had felt it, a change in the air. He slowly raised his eyes to the ridge on the opposite side of the small canyon. A man was standing there, a mile away, but silhouetted clearly against the brown sky. He was looking down at them through a spyglass. The sun glinted off the brass. The man lowered the spyglass. Even from this distance, there was no mistaking the shape, the posture. Red Jack Mercer. He had not been fooled. He had followed them. Or he had been waiting. It did not matter. He had seen them. He had seen what they found. Keaton did not run. He met the distant, unseen gaze. He knew, and Red Jack knew he knew. The game was over. The hunt had begun. Red Jack Mercer's appearance on the ridge was not a threat. It was a declaration. The game of hiding was over. "Back to the children," Keaton said, his voice a low, urgent command. "Move. Do not run. Walk fast. He is too far to shoot. He is watching. He is planning." Evelyn's heart hammered, but she forced her body to obey. She slid the charred ledger and the blueprint inside her blouse, the rough paper scratching her skin. It was the safest place. They moved quickly, keeping low, their eyes fixed on the distant, solitary figure. When they were out of the spyglass's range, they broke into a dead run. They reached the children, who were waiting with Tiana, their small faces pale. "We go," Keaton said. "There is no more time for the canyon. We take the shortest way, the most dangerous way. It is what he will expect." "He will be waiting," Tiana whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Yes," Keaton said. "At Dead Man's Gulch. It is the only way to get the horses through fast." Dead Man's Gulch was a jagged cut in the earth, a natural bottleneck of high, red walls. Red Jack would have men on both rims. To ride into it was suicide. They rode hard for an hour, Keaton pushing them, the children riding double, their small arms locked around Evelyn and Tiana. When they were a mile from the gulch's entrance, Keaton stopped them. "I need your fire," he said to Tiana, pointing to the flint and steel in her bag. He took it, along with a dry branch of sage. He looked at Evelyn. "He is smart. He will watch the main entrance. But there is another fork, a box canyon, half a mile south. I am going to give him something to watch." He rode off, disappearing into the rocks. Evelyn waited, her heart in her throat, surrounded by the terrified, silent children. 10 minutes later, A thin plume of smoke rose from the south, visible just above the canyon rim. Keaton had started a decoy fire. He reappeared, his face grim. "He will send men to see it. That will split them. Now we use the noise." He led them toward the true entrance of the gulch. He put his fingers to his mouth and let out a sharp, piercing whistle that echoed, bouncing off the high walls. He motioned for them to ride. "Fast now, and make noise. Yell. Make them think we are a dozen riders, trying to panic." Evelyn, Tiana, and even the children began to whoop and shout, their voices multiplied by the canyon walls. Gunshots erupted from the rim. High above them, bullets whined, chipping stone, but they were firing blind, confused by the smoke and the cacophony of echoes. "It is working," Evelyn shouted. But Red Jack was, as Keaton had said, smart. As they rounded the main bend, he appeared, blocking the path with two of his men. The trap had failed, so he had become the trap. "Nowhere left to run, Black Horse," Red Jack snarled, his rifle leveled. Keaton did not slow down. He veered his horse, charging straight up the steep, scree-covered side of the gulch, a path that looked impossible. "Follow me," he bellowed. The horses scrambled, digging for purchase, sending a shower of rocks down. Red Jack's men fired. One of the pack mules went down. Tiana screamed as a bullet tore through the sleeve of her dress. One of the raiders, seeing Tiana and the children, broke from the group, spurring his horse to cut them off. He was closing the distance, his pistol raised. Evelyn reacted without thinking. She pulled the small, pearl-handled pistol her father had given her, a weapon she had carried in her valise for 2 years and had never fired. She raised it, her arm shaking, and aimed not for the man, but for the rock wall just above his head. She fired. The sound was a sharp pop. The bullet hit the sandstone, exploding in a puff of red dust and stone fragments. The man cried out, shielding his face as the ricochet stung his cheek. He reined in his horse, stunned by the shot. It was perfect, a warning, a message. Keaton, who had seen it all, grabbed Tiana's reins and pulled her horse up the last stretch. They burst from the gulch onto the open mesa, free of the trap. They did not stop. They rode for another hour, the horses breathing in ragged, painful gasps, until Keaton was certain they were not being followed. As they passed a cluster of boulders, a figure stumbled out, waving his arms. He was young, perhaps 18, his face a mass of bruises and his shirt torn. He looked starved and terrified. "Wait," he cried, his voice cracking. "Please, I saw you at the pump station. You are not with them." Keaton reined in, his rifle instantly trained on the boy. "Who are you?" "My name is Tommy," the boy gasped, sinking to his knees. "I am one of them. The workers. Carver trapped me. I signed a paper, just for food, and now he says I owe him $200. We are prisoners. I saw you. I saw what you found. When Red Jack rode off, I ran." Evelyn slid from her horse and ran to him, offering her canteen. "You are safe. Tommy, we are not with Carver." Tommy drank, the water spilling down his chin. He looked up, his eyes wide with a desperate, fearful honesty. "He is a monster. He is poisoning the wells. He is killing the land. And he is killing us. You have to stop him." "We are trying," Evelyn said gently. "We have the blueprint. We have the ledger." "That is nothing," Tommy said, shaking his head. He reached inside his torn shirt and pulled out a small, single brass key, attached to a dirty string around his neck. "He trusts me. See, I'm good with numbers. He had me working in the depot office sometimes, fetching things. He does not know I can read." He pressed the key into Keaton's hand. "That is for safe number 17, Tommy said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "In the depot office, behind the ticket counter. That is where he keeps the other book, the black one, the one with the real numbers, not our debts, the money he pays. To the judge, to the politicians, to Sheriff Miller. It is all in there." This was it, the proof that Keaton had said they needed, the proof that would turn the town. They rode only at night, avoiding every known road. Keaton led them on paths Evelyn did not know existed, through dry washes and high, hidden pastures. The children were exhausted, but their silence had become a kind of strength. They trusted Keaton. They trusted Evelyn. When they finally reached Silver Mesa, it was 2 hours before dawn. The town was asleep, a collection of dark, silent shapes. Keaton did not lead them down the main street. He led them through the alleys, to the back door of the boarding house. He knocked, a soft, specific rhythm. The door opened a crack. A woman's voice, sharp and wary, asked, "Who is it?" "Alma," Keaton said. "I have children. They are in trouble." The door swung open. Alma was the boarding house proprietor, a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and a face that had seen everything and forgiven very little. She was the town's conscience, its unofficial mother. She held a lamp in one hand and a shotgun in the other. Her eyes took in the scene in one sweeping glance. Keaton, Evelyn, Tiana, and the 7 exhausted, dusty children. She did not ask what had happened. She did not ask who they were running from. She simply lowered the shotgun. "Get them inside," she said, her voice softening. "There is soup on the stove, and the attic rooms are clean. They will be safe here." Tiana began to cry, for the first time in quiet, racking sobs of relief. Alma put an arm around her. "You are safe now. Child, all of you, no one will find them here." Keaton nodded to Alma, a look of deep, silent gratitude. He turned to Evelyn. "We have to see Miller. Now." They found Sheriff Miller in his office, asleep at his desk, his head resting on a stack of wanted posters. He woke with a start, his hand flying to his gun. "Black Horse. What in God's name and Miss Hart? I thought you left town." "We have a witness, Sheriff," Evelyn said, pushing Tommy gently forward. Miller's eyes narrowed. "I know this boy. Tommy, you work for Carver." "I was a prisoner. Sheriff," Tommy said, his voice stronger now. He pulled up his shirt, showing the long, raw bruises on his back. "This is what Carver pays." For the next 10 minutes, they laid it all out. The pump station, the burnt ledger, the forced labor, the poisoned well, the children. Sheriff Miller's face, which had been wary and hard, slowly crumpled. He sat down heavily. He looked at his hands, then at the wall, at the framed certificate of his election. "I owe him," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. He saved my farm. Back in '73, a banknote was called in. Carver paid it. He said it was a gift, a welcome to the town. He never let me forget it." "He bought you?" "Sheriff," Evelyn said, her voice not sharp, but sad. "I know," Miller said, his voice thick. He looked at Tommy. He looked at the key that Keaton had placed on his desk. "But this is not what I signed up for. Attacking children, poison, slavery. No." He stood up. The man who had been stooped and worn was gone. In his place was a lawman. "But I cannot arrest him," Miller said, and the frustration was plain in his voice. "Carver owns the territorial judge. I arrest him. He is out in an hour, and I am ruined. We need that book. Keaton. We need the proof that will destroy him in public, in the court of the people." He picked up the key. "This is it. You get that book. You bring it to me. And I swear, I will stand with you. I will telegraph the United States Marshal myself." Keaton and Evelyn left the office, leaving Tommy in the sheriff's care. Miller had bolted the door behind them and was already barring the windows. They stepped out into the alley. The air was cool and heavy. A single drop of water hit Evelyn's face, and then another. A slow, steady rain began to fall. It was the first rain in 4 months. The dust of the street, which had been a fine, choking powder, turned dark. The smell of the wet earth, the smell of life, rose around them. They stood for a moment, just breathing it in. The sound of the rain on the tin roofs was a miracle. It was a cleansing. Evelyn, exhausted to her bones, shivered in the cold, damp air. Keaton did not say a word. He took off his own canvas coat, the one he had worn since she met him. He draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm from his body, and smelled of sage and rain. She pulled it close, her hands brushing his as she took the lapels. Their fingers touched. It was a brief, accidental contact, but it sent a shock through her. She looked up at him. He was watching her, his dark eyes unreadable in the pre-dawn light. The rain fell on his bare shoulders, but he did not seem to notice. The silence was absolute, a small, safe bubble in the center of the dark. Sleeping town. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded, his gaze holding hers. It was a promise, a bond, forged in a canyon and sealed in the rain. "Let's go," he said, his voice rough. "The depot office before the town wakes up." They moved as one, heading for the rail yard. The rain was falling harder now, a welcome drumming noise that covered their footsteps. They reached the edge of the yard, the dark shape of the depot office just ahead. And then a shout cut through the rain. "Fire at the warehouse!" A bright, terrible orange light bloomed against the dark sky. The main town warehouse, a huge wooden structure filled with feed, grain, and lumber, was erupting in flame. "It is a diversion," Keaton said, his voice flat and cold. Chaos. Men were shouting, doors were slamming. The town's fire bell began to clang, a desperate, panicked sound. People were running from their homes, buckets in hand, all heading for the fire. "Miller," Evelyn said, her heart seizing. "Tommy." They turned and ran, pushing against the crowd, back to the sheriff's office. They were too late. The door was off its hinges. The wood splintered. The office was empty, papers scattered on the wet floor. Sheriff Miller was gone, pulled away by the fire. And Tommy was gone. On the floor, in the middle of the room, was a small, brass key, a perfect match for the one in Keaton's pocket. Red Jack had been there. He had taken their witness, and he had left a message. He knew about the safe. The fire bell was a frantic, desperate clang in the rain. The whole of Silver Mesa was running toward the warehouse, a chaotic mass of shouting men in nightshirts, their faces lit by the leaping orange flames. Keaton Black Horse Yazzie did not even look at the fire. He stood in the wreckage of the sheriff's office, the door hanging from one hinge. He looked at the floor. The rain, blowing through the ruined doorway, was already turning the dust to mud, but he saw it. Drag marks, the prints of heavy boots, and a smaller, lighter set of feet being pulled, struggling. Evelyn Hart stood beside him, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She saw the small brass key on the floor, the one Red Jack had left, a mockery, a message. "They took Tommy," she whispered, the rain on her face mixing with the sudden, hot tears of rage. Keaton was already moving, his eyes on the ground. The marks were clear, heading away from the fire, away from the town, toward the darkness of the rail yard. "The fire is a lie," Keaton said, his voice flat and deadly. "It was to pull the town away. He is using the train." They ran. They pushed against the flow of panicked citizens, ducking into the black, rain-slicked alleys. The rail yard was deserted. The fire painted the underside of the clouds a sickening orange. But here, there was only steam and shadow. A single engine hissed, its pressure up. It was not a passenger train. It was a short freight line, a few boxcars and a dark, refined car at the end. An office car. Keaton saw them. 3 men. Red Jack Mercer, his form unmistakable, shoving Tommy toward the steps of the last car. The boy was fighting, but he was small, and they were strong. "We cannot take them here," Keaton said, pulling Evelyn into the deep shadow of the water tower. "Too many. They are ready for us." The train gave a lurch, the coupling chains snapping tight. With a groan of steam, It began to move. "At Keaton's request?" Evelyn asked, her voice desperate. "What do we do?" Keaton was already moving toward the sound of his horse, which he had tethered in a nearby alley. He knew this train. It was Carver's private engine. He knew its route. It will not stop. It is going to the pass. It has to cross bridge number 3. He untied the horse, his movements fast and precise. He swung into the saddle and reached down, his arm like steel, locking around Evelyn's waist and pulling her up to sit behind him. She barely had time to grip his coat before he spurred the horse into a gallop. They did not follow the tracks. The train had to follow the long, winding grade into the foothills. Keaton cut straight up the mesa, a dangerous, near-vertical climb in the mud and darkness. The horse strained, its lungs burning, but Keaton guided it with a firm, knowing hand. They rode for 20 minutes, the sound of the laboring engine a distant, rhythmic chug on their left. They were racing it. The rain was slowing to a drizzle, but the wind in the high country was a cold, sharp knife. They reached the canyon first. Bridge number 3 was a skeleton of timber and iron, a high, narrow trestle built to span the deep, black chasm of the Arroyo Malo. The canyon was 300 feet deep, the wind howling through it. Keaton dismounted, pulling Evelyn down with him. He led the horse into a thicket of juniper and tied it. He looked at her. The light from the approaching engine was just beginning to touch the far end of the canyon. "He will be on the flat car," Keaton said, "guarding it. I will stop the train. I will keep him busy. Tommy is in that last car. Red Jack will have him tied." He handed her his knife. The blade was heavy, sharp. Evelyn's hand was shaking as she took it. "I do not understand. How do I get to him?" Keaton pointed down, at the massive support beams under the track. "You do not go over. You go under." Her blood ran cold. She looked at the drop, a sheer, dizzying fall into blackness. He put his hand on her shoulder. His grip was firm. "You can do this. You are stronger than this place." The train's headlamp washed the bridge in a bright, white light. The engine was slowing, taking the trestle with caution. Keaton stepped from the shadows onto the tracks, his rifle in his hands. He was a single, dark figure of defiance. He raised the rifle and fired, not at the cab, at the steam dome. The bullet screamed, and with a percussive hiss, a plume of white steam erupted. The engineer slammed the brakes. The train wheels locked, screeching, showering sparks onto the creosote-soaked timbers. The train shuddered to a violent halt, the office car stopping directly over the center of the canyon. A shot rang out from the flat car. "Red Jack." "Now!" Keaton yelled. Evelyn did not hesitate. As Keaton dove for the cover of a steel girder, she swung herself over the edge of the bridge. Her feet found a narrow crossbeam. She was hanging in the void, the wind tearing at her, the canyon floor a distant, dark patch far below. Above her, the gunfight exploded. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness, the bullets whining off the engine. Keaton was yelling, his voice sharp and clear, drawing Red Jack's fire, taunting him. Evelyn moved, hand over hand, her body pressed against the rough, splintery wood. She was beneath the train, moving along the narrow supports. She reached the office car. She looked. He was not inside. He was under it. Red Jack had chained him to the axle itself, dangling him just above the beams, like an animal. Tommy saw her, his eyes wide with terror. She pulled herself closer, hanging by one hand, and sawed at the chain with the knife. It was useless. The iron was too thick. Sparks. She looked up. The sparks from the braking wheels had found purchase. A small, hungry flame licked at a support beam. The bridge was catching fire. Tommy pulled at his bonds. "The key," he whispered, frantic. He had the key. Evelyn knew he meant Red Jack. She had no key. She looked at the manacles. They were simple, heavy. She saw the hinge. She saw the pin. She put the point of the knife against the head of the pin and took the handle in both hands. She was hanging by her legs, wrapped around a beam. the firelight growing. She began to hammer the knife handle against the pin, a desperate, rhythmic pounding. Above, the fight was furious. Keaton had taken down one of Red Jack's men, the other was pinned. Red Jack was exposed, his rage making him careless. The pin moved. Evelyn sobbed, her arms burning. She struck it again and again. It flew free. The cuff sprang open. Tommy was free. She helped him, pulling him along the beams. The fire was growing, a sheet of orange eating at the supports. They climbed up, rolling onto the main deck of the bridge just as Keaton's rifle spoke for the last time. The second man fell. Only Red Jack was left. He was bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, his face a mask of fury. He saw Evelyn and Tommy, and he let out a roar. He lunged, not at Keaton, but at her. Keaton met him mid-charge. They collided, a brutal clash of bodies, and fell, rolling hand-to-hand on the narrow walkway. The bridge groaned. A main support, eaten by the fire, gave way. The tracks sagged. Evelyn stumbled, reaching for Tommy, but the deck gave way beneath her. The burning planks crumbled. She screamed, falling through, her hands grabbing a single, hot tie. She was dangling, the chasm pulling at her, the fire searing her face. Keaton saw it. He had Red Jack on the ground. He had the advantage. He looked from his enemy to Evelyn. He did not hesitate. He released Red Jack, kicking him back, and scrambled for the lariat still coiled at his belt. Red Jack pulled his pistol, but Keaton was not looking at him. He was looking at Evelyn. He swung the rope, a single, perfect loop that sailed through the smoke and fire. It settled over her, pinning her arms. He braced himself, pulling, his boots sliding on the burning ties. He hauled her up, hand over hand, his muscles straining. She came over the edge, collapsing against his chest, her body trembling. The fire roared behind them, a solid wall of light. The bridge was dying. They were both breathing in ragged, painful gasps. She looked up at him, her face smudged with soot and tears, her eyes shining with a wild, terrifying life. A shaky laugh, half a sob, escaped her. "Do you kiss all the women you save?" she teased, her voice hoarse. Keaton's grim face, illuminated by the fire, softened. A smile, slow and real, touched his mouth. His voice was a low rasp. "Only you." He leaned down, and in the heart of the inferno, he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was smoke and desperation and relief. It was brief, firm, and absolute. It ended as quickly as it began. The moment shattered. Tommy was yelling, "That car! That one!" He pointed to the boxcar directly behind the engine. "It is full of rifles. An army for Carver." Keaton nodded. He and Evelyn ran to the coupling, the heat blistering their skin. Keaton smashed the pin with the butt of his rifle. It snapped. He and Evelyn put their shoulders to the heavy car. It groaned, resisted, then began to roll. It moved backward, onto the sagging, burning section of the track. It balanced there for one long, terrible moment, outlined against the flames, and then the bridge gave way. The boxcar, filled with Carver's power, plunged into the canyon. It was followed by a rain of fire and exploding ammunition, a chain of detonations that lit up the chasm like lightning. "Now the safe," Evelyn said. They ran to the office car. The fire was licking at its back. Inside, it was a world of luxury, velvet, mahogany, and a single, black iron safe. Number 17. Keaton still had the key, the one Tommy had given him. He thrust it into the lock. It turned. He swung the heavy door open. Inside, there was only one thing, a thick, black leather ledger. He grabbed it. The car lurched, the fire consuming its wheels. "We have to go," Tommy yelled. They jumped from the car, landing on the solid ground at the end of the bridge. Just as a new sound reached them, the engine. Red Jack was in the cab. He had it in reverse, trying to pull away. He saw them. He saw Keaton holding the book. He screamed, a sound of pure, inhuman rage that was lost in the wind. "I will have your head before sunrise. Black Horse, I swear it." The engine shot backward into the darkness, carrying Red Jack away. Keaton, Evelyn, and Tommy stood at the edge of the chasm. They were alive. They had the book. They had their witness. They watched as bridge number 3, Carver's monument to his own progress, burned and collapsed, section by section, into the hungry darkness. The battle was won. But they were miles from town, on foot, and Red Jack was out there, a promise of a new and terrible dawn. The walk back from the chasm was a journey through a nightmare. The rain had stopped, replaced by a cold, wet wind that turned the smoke and ash into a pasty, gray mud. Keaton's horse was gone, fled in the fire. They were on foot, miles from Silver Mesa, with dawn approaching. Keaton carried the black ledger. Evelyn, still draped in his coat, helped Tommy, who was weak and favoring a badly bruised ankle. They moved through the broken land, following the washes, avoiding the high ridges. The destruction of bridge number 3 had bought them victory, but it had also, for the first time, made Keaton the visible enemy. He had destroyed Carver's property. He had destroyed the railroad. They reached the edge of Silver Mesa as the sky was turning a sick, pale gray. The town was exhausted. The warehouse fire still smoldered, a column of black smoke rising into the damp air. Men sat on the boardwalks, their faces black with soot, their buckets empty. The fire bell was finally silent. Keaton led them through the back alleys, moving like a ghost in his own town. He stopped at the rear entrance of Alma's boarding house. He knocked the quiet, rhythmic signal. The door opened instantly. Alma was there, her shotgun still in her hand. She saw the 3 of them, covered in mud and soot, and her eyes widened. She pulled them inside, into the warm, safe kitchen. Alma looked at Tommy, her gaze softening. She took him from Evelyn. Helping him to a chair, she ran a hand over his head. "You are safe now." "Thomas," she said, her voice a low rumble. "We have the children upstairs. They are sleeping. You will join them." She turned to Keaton and Evelyn. Her eyes fell on the black ledger Keaton placed on the table. "So," she said, "it is true." Before Keaton could answer, the front door of the boarding house burst open. It was Sheriff Miller. He was not wearing his hat. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. He did not look at Keaton. He looked at Evelyn. "Carver is on the street," he said, his voice tight. "He found out about the bridge. Red Jack made it back to town. He has turned the whole town against you, Keaton." From the street, they heard a man's voice, amplified by rage and power. It was Boone Carver. Evelyn moved to the front parlor window, peeking through the lace curtain. Carver was standing on the steps of his railroad office. He was not the polished politician from the party. He was a warlord. Red Jack was beside him, his arm in a sling, his face a mask of black fury. A crowd had gathered, men with rifles, their faces confused and angry. Carver raised his arms. He pointed to the smoldering warehouse, then toward the canyon. "He has destroyed our town," Carver roared. "That savage, Black Horse Yazzie, has destroyed the bridge. He has burned our supplies. He has sabotaged your future." A man in the crowd yelled, "What about Tommy?" Carver's face became a mask of sorrow. "He has taken the boy, kidnapped him. We tried to stop him. My man, Jack, was wounded trying to save the poor lad." It was a perfect lie, delivered with blinding speed. Carver was using the fire, the bridge, and Tommy as weapons against them. "I am offering a reward," Carver bellowed. $500 for the man who brings Keaton Black Horse Yazzie to me. Alive. I want him tried. I want him to face the justice of this town. The crowd roared. A posse. They were forming a posse. Miller turned to Keaton in the kitchen. "The back door," he said, his voice urgent. "He has a wire from the territorial judge. I got a copy. It names you, Keaton, for sabotage, destruction of property, kidnapping. I have to post the warrant. I have no choice. My badge is on the line." Keaton nodded, his face grim. He picked up the ledger. "No," Miller said, holding up a hand. "Leave it. Leave it with Alma. It is the one thing he cannot know we have. If you are caught with it, he will kill you just to get it back. It is safe here. Alma has a better safe than the railroad." Alma nodded, taking the book. She went to the kitchen floor, pulled back a rug, and lifted a section of floorboard. She placed the book in a metal box beneath it. "No one finds this," she stated. Miller looked at Keaton. "I have to post this warrant. Keaton, but I do not have to serve it. He thinks he owns me. He is wrong. You need to disappear. Get out of town." "Where?" Evelyn asked. "Mesa Blanca," Miller said, his eyes on Keaton. "Your people, they will not find you there. Lay low. Give me time. I have the ranchers, the ones Carver squeezed. They are ready to talk. They just need to know they will win. Go, now." Keaton looked at Evelyn. "This is where we part," he said. Evelyn shook her head. Her face was set. "I am not leaving. I am not a tutor. I am not a refugee. I am the witness. My testimony, plus that book, is the only thing that will stop him. Wherever you go, I go." Keaton saw the steel in her eyes. He knew he could not change her mind. He nodded once. They fled out the back door, into the alley. They heard Miller in the street, his voice raised, reluctantly reading the warrant. They slipped past the livery, took Keaton's horse, and rode out of Silver Mesa, not as guides, but as fugitives. They rode hard for hours, pushing into the high country. Keaton was silent, his body rigid. Evelyn saw him favoring his side. The fight on the bridge had been more brutal than she knew. A piece of shrapnel or a splintered tie had gashed his ribs. Blood was soaking through his shirt, the same shirt he had put back on after the rain. He must go to his family. The Mesa Blanca was a high, flat table of rock, a fortress of the earth. He led her to a place she would never have found, a small cluster of hogans, structures of earth and wood, nestled in a hidden fold of the canyon. He stopped his horse before one and dismounted. He stood for a long moment. An old woman emerged, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her silver hair pulled back in the traditional Dine way. She was his great-aunt. She looked at Keaton. She looked at his wound. She looked at the white woman on his horse. She said nothing. She simply gestured for them to enter. The hogan was cool and dark. It smelled of sage and pinon smoke. It was one round room, the earth packed hard and clean. The old woman motioned for Keaton to sit. She took a clay pot and began to mix herbs. Evelyn watched, useless. This was a world she did not understand, a quiet, rooted knowledge that felt older than the stones of Boston. The woman worked, her movements fluid and certain. She cleaned Keaton's wound, a deep, ugly cut, and applied a dark green poultice. She wrapped his chest with clean linen. She spoke to Keaton in her language, her voice soft. Keaton's face was tight with pain, but he answered her with respect. Evelyn asked, "What did she say?" He looked at the packed earth floor. "She asked if I brought this trouble." "And what did you say?" "I told her yes," he answered, his voice rough. The old woman looked at Evelyn. She did not smile. She just looked. Then she spoke to Keaton again, a longer speech, her hands moving. He looked up at Evelyn. "She says the coyote is clever. He runs from side to side, and he thinks he is fooling the hunter. But the straight path, the path of the earth, is the only one that does not lead back to the trap. She says I have been running in zigzags for too long. It is time to walk the straight path." Keaton was quiet, his internal conflict clear. He had brought this war to his family. He had put this woman, his great-aunt, in the path of Red Jack Mercer. He feared this more than he feared Carver. Evelyn felt a wave of guilt, and then a cold resolve. She needed to understand. She left the hogan, letting him rest. She walked out into the small community. She found the well. It was not a well, like in Silver Mesa. It was a spring, bubbling up from the rock, or it had been. It was now a dark, muddy hole. The pump. Carver's pump was not just stealing from the agency. It was stealing from here. It was draining the entire mesa. A line of Dine women, Tiana among them, stood there. They were not waiting for water to flow. They were taking turns, using small, carved cups to scrape the wet mud from the bottom of the spring. For every cup of mud, they would get a few precious drops of water. It was a slow, agonizing, desperate labor. Evelyn watched, her throat closing. This was the truth. This was not a story for a newspaper. This was not an abstract fight over land deeds. This was life, being stolen drop by drop. Her fear vanished. Her journalistic detachment. The shield she had always worn. It evaporated. She had feared failing, feared running back to Boston with an incomplete story. Now, she feared something new. She feared that just publishing the story was not enough. It was an abandonment. It was its own kind of zigzag path. She walked back to the hogan. Keaton was sitting up. The poultice was working. He saw the look on her face. "What is it?" "The well," she said. "It is dry." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I know." He looked at his hands. "Red Jack will come here. He knows these lands. I have brought this to them. I should take you, and I should ride north, to Colorado. Disappear." "No," Evelyn said. She knelt in front of him. The old woman was right. The straight path. We have been running. We have been reacting. It is time to stop. She took his hand. Her grip was as firm as his had been on the bridge. "We are not running. We have the ledger. Alma has it. That proves the bribery. That proves why he did it. But it does not prove what he did," Keaton finished, understanding her. "The land office," Evelyn said, her voice low and intense. "The original territorial maps, the ones that show Blue Spring as public land, and the deeds, Keaton, the deeds with the thumbprints, the ones I saw in his office, they must be filed. They are the legal proof of the crime." They would have to go back, not to hide, not to run, but to attack. They rode back to Silver Mesa that night. They left the horse outside town and slipped in on foot, back to the jail. Miller was waiting. He had done his work. He was not alone. 2 ranchers, men with hard faces and harder hands, stood with him. Miller nodded to Keaton. "They are ready," he said. "They will testify. They will tell the town how Carver's men threatened them, how he promised them water he had already stolen. Alma will testify about the children. We have the witnesses." "It is not enough," Evelyn said. "Carver still owns the judge. We need the documents, the maps." "We have a problem," Miller said. "Carver is not stupid. He knows he is exposed. He is cleaning his tracks. He has locked the land office. He has his own men inside, guarding it." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Evelyn felt a cold dread. She ran from the jail to the telegraph office. The night operator knew her. He was a friend of Tommy's. She ran back to the jail, a small slip of yellow paper in her hand. She was breathless. "A special train," she said. "Carver has ordered a special train. It leaves at 2:00 in the morning. He is not just running. He is taking the evidence. The operator says Carver's men are loading crates from his office and from the land office." They all understood. They did not have days. They had hours. Carver was taking the maps, the ledger, and all the fraudulent deeds. He was going to wipe Silver Mesa from the map, leaving them with no water and no proof. "The straight path," Keaton said. "It leads right to the land office." The air in Sheriff Miller's office was thick with the suffocating weight of an impossible choice. The clock on the wall was ticking toward midnight. The train was scheduled for 2:00 in the morning. "A 3-pronged plan," Miller said, his voice low and firm. He was a new man. The fog of indecision burned away. He jabbed a finger at the town map. "Alma, You are the bravest woman I know. Carver's men are watching the station, but they are also watching his office. They are waiting for us. You will give them something to watch." Alma, who had joined them, her face set like stone, nodded once. "A diversion." "More than that," Miller said. "You will load that old freight wagon of yours. Fill it with every empty crate and barrel you have. Make it look heavy. Make it look secret. You will drive it from the alley behind your place, heading south, just before 2 o'clock. You will make noise. They will think you are moving the ledger, moving the evidence. They will follow you." "And leave the station unguarded," Alma finished, a grim smile touching her lips. "I can do that." "While she draws them south," Miller continued. Turning to the two ranchers, "You and I will make our move at the rail yard. We will not be subtle. We will be loud. We will challenge the guards Carver has posted, claiming we have a warrant for his arrest. For the fire, it will be chaos. It will pull every man he has left to the train." "And us?" Evelyn asked. She stood beside Keaton, the two of them a single, quiet shadow in the lamp-lit office. "The land office?" Keaton said. His voice was soft, but it cut through the room. "While the whole town is looking at the station, we go in, the straight path." Miller looked at them, his respect clear. "It is the only chance. You get those maps, you get those deeds, get them to the town hall. Do not come to the station. Do not come to me. Get them to the hall. I will meet you there." As they spoke, a new sound began, a low, rising moan, coming from the mountains. The wind. It was not the gentle rain from before. This was a dry, angry wind. It hit the town with a sudden, violent force, rattling the windows, sending dust and debris scraping across the boardwalks. A dry storm. The air became thick with grit. "Good," Keaton said, his voice almost a whisper. "The earth is on our side. It will cover our movements." The town became a hell of noise and flying sand. The air was so thick you could not see 20 feet. It was a suffocating, blinding world. The perfect cover. Keaton and Evelyn moved through the storm, their heads down, their faces covered by bandanas. The streets were empty. The storm had driven everyone inside, except for the men they now had to face. They reached the land office, as Miller had said. Two of Carver's men stood guard on the porch, their rifles held close, their backs to the wind. Keaton pointed. "They will not leave the porch. We go in the back." The rear of the building was dark, the alley a swirling vortex of sand. The back door was heavy, solid. Keaton knelt by the lock. It was a standard government issue, simple, arrogant. He had seen their type at cavalry depots. He pulled a thin piece of steel from his boot, a tool he had kept from his old life. He worked in the howling wind, his hands sure, despite the throbbing pain in his side. The sand stung his skin, but his focus was absolute. He did not hear the wind. He heard only the lock. With a small, dry click, the mechanism turned. He pushed the door open. They were inside. The office was a tomb of paper. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A single, weak lantern, left by the guards, cast long, flickering shadows. Keaton moved to the front of the building, his rifle ready. He would watch the guards. "Find them," he said. Evelyn went to work. This was her world. She did not need light. She needed organization. She ran her fingers along the drawers. Deeds. 1877. 1878. She pulled a heavy drawer open. Hart, Miller, Yazzie. She was looking for the ranchers' names, the ones who had been forced. She found them, one after another. Contracts of sale, and at the bottom, just as she had seen in Carver's office, the dark, desperate smudge of a thumbprint, pressed beside a name the man clearly could not write. She began pulling them, stacking them. "The maps, Evelyn!" Keaton's voice was an urgent whisper from the front of the office. "We need the maps." She found the map room, a separate, tall cabinet. She pulled the drawer. Territorial Survey, 1871. She unrolled the heavy linen map. There it was, Blue Spring, and the lands around it, clearly marked in blue ink. Public trust, not for private sale. She took the map. She took the deeds. She was rolling them into a tight bundle when she heard Keaton's voice, no longer a whisper, but a sharp command. Get back. She looked up. Red Jack Mercer was standing in the open back doorway. He was a nightmare figure, his clothes caked in dust, his one good arm holding a heavy pistol. The storm howled behind him. The fire was a lie, Red Jack rasped, his eyes burning with a feverish hatred. He had not gone to the warehouse. He had not been fooled. And Alma's wagon was a lie. I knew you would come here. Black Horse, you and the woman. He stepped inside. Keaton moved from the front of the office, placing himself between Evelyn and Red Jack. The two men faced each other in the narrow, file-lined hallway. It is over, Jack, Keaton said, his voice calm. His rifle was level. It is over when your head is on the ground. Red Jack spat. He fired. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Keaton did not fire back. He dove sideways, crashing into a stack of cabinets. The bullet tore through the wood where he had been standing. Red Jack lunged, using the smoke, his bad arm no hindrance to his brute strength. He slammed into Keaton, and the two men went down in a tangle of limbs and scattered paper. Keaton's rifle skittered away into the darkness. It was not a duel. It was a brawl. A brutal, desperate fight between two wounded, exhausted men. Keaton drove his fist into Red Jack's wounded shoulder, and the man roared. But he brought his knee up, catching Keaton in his wounded ribs. Keaton gasped, the pain blinding. Red Jack was stronger. He got on top, his one good hand locking around Keaton's throat, his thumb pressed down. I told you, he hissed, his face inches from Keaton's, his breath foul. I told you. Evelyn screamed. She grabbed a heavy book, a county ledger, and brought it down on the back of Red Jack's head. He grunted, his grip faltering, but he did not release. He was a man fueled by pure, uncut malice. Evelyn looked around, frantic. The lantern, the one she had used to find the maps, and a small hand mirror on the clerk's desk, used for straightening collars. She grabbed them both. Red Jack saw her. He laughed, a low, choking sound. You going to hit me with that, too, little lady? No, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She held the lantern high, and she angled the mirror, catching the bright, white flame and reflecting it, a focused, blinding beam, directly into Red Jack's eyes. He roared, an animal sound, his head rearing back. His grip on Keaton's throat broke. He was momentarily, completely blind. It was all Keaton needed. He twisted, his legs wrapping around Red Jack, and threw him off. He was on his feet in one motion. He did not go for his rifle. He kicked Red Jack's pistol away. He stood over the man, who was blinking, spots dancing in his eyes. Keaton's knife was in his hand. Do it, Black Horse, Red Jack snarled, squinting up at him. Prove you are no better than me. Kill the man who cannot see. Keaton stood, his chest heaving, his ribs screaming. He looked at the man who had tried to kill him, who had tried to kill Evelyn, who had kidnapped Tommy. He saw the hate, and he saw a pathetic, broken man. He lowered the knife. No, Keaton said. I am not you. He stepped back. He picked up his rifle. He found a coil of rope used for tying bundles of paper. He threw it to Evelyn. Tie him. Justice, not revenge. The old woman's words. The straight path. As Evelyn finished tying Red Jack's hands, a new sound came from the alley. A muffled shouting. Cries for help. Keaton looked at Evelyn. Wait here. He went out into the storm. The sound was coming from the railroad supply depot. The building next door. The door was barred from the outside. Keaton smashed the bar with his rifle butt. The door flew open. A dozen men spilled out, choking, their faces pale with fear and dust. It was the workers from the pump station. Tommy was with them. "He locked us in," Tommy said, running to Evelyn. "When he took me from the jail, he brought me here. He was going to put us on the train, ship us to Mexico." The men were looking at Keaton, then at the bound form of Red Jack on the floor. Their fear was turning to a slow, cold anger. "He is the one," Tommy said, pointing at Red Jack. "He is the one who whipped us." The group of workers took a step toward Red Jack. "No," Keaton said, his voice a command. "Not like this. We do it the right way. We do it in the light." A new sound, far away. A train whistle, frantic. And then a bell, not the fire bell. The church bell, it was ringing, deep and slow, a sound that cut through the storm. "What is that?" Evelyn asked. "That," said a voice from the doorway, "is the sound of the town waking up." Sheriff Miller stood there, his badge bright on his chest. The ranchers were with him. Alma's diversion worked. They chased her for 3 miles, and our little party at the station was a success. "We have Carver." "What?" Evelyn said. "He was not on the train. He was heading for the town hall. He was going to burn the county records. He ran right into us," Miller said, a grim smile on his face. "He is locked in my jail. We have nipped the head off the snake." He looked at the workers, at Tommy, at the bound form of Red Jack, at the bundle of maps in Evelyn's hand. "We have it all," Miller said. He looked at Keaton. "All of it." The church bell continued to ring, slow and steady, a summons. "What is that bell for, Sheriff?" Tommy asked. "I sent the deputy," Miller said. "I told him to ring it until every man, woman, and child in Silver Mesa is standing in the town hall. Carver wanted a trial. We are going to give him one." The storm was slowing. The wind was dying down, as if the land itself was holding its breath. "It is time," Miller said. "Sunrise. We are holding a public court. And you," he said, pointing to Evelyn and her bundle of paper, "are the prosecution." The Silver Mesa Town Hall was not a court. It was a large, wooden room, smelling of floor polish and stale cigar smoke. But on this morning, as the first clean light of dawn cut through the windows, it was the only court that mattered. The room was full. Every bench was taken. People stood along the walls, their faces pale and grim. They were ranchers, shopkeepers, wives, and saloon girls, all drawn by the insistent, solemn ringing of the church bell. They were soot-stained from the warehouse fire, their eyes red from the sandstorm. They were a town pushed to the very edge, and they were hungry for an answer. At the front, on a raised platform, Sheriff Miller stood behind a simple wooden table. To his right sat Boone Carver, his fine suit rumpled and stained, his face the color of ash. 2 deputies, the ranchers Miller had deputized, stood behind him, in a separate chair, his hands still bound. Red Jack Mercer sat staring at the floor, a caged, simmering animal. Keaton, Black Horse Yazzie, and Evelyn Hart stood to one side. Keaton was watchful, his body tense, the bandage on his side a stark white against his dark shirt. Evelyn held a roll of maps and a stack of papers. Alma, her face set, held the black ledger. Miller slammed a gavel on the table. The low murmur of the crowd died. "I called this meeting," Miller began, his voice rough. "You all know what happened last night. You saw the fire. You heard the lies. Now you are going to hear the truth." He looked at Carver. "Mr. Boone Carver has accused Keaton Yazzie of sabotage and kidnapping. We are here to see if that charge holds, and we are here." His voice grew louder. "To find out what happened to our water." A tense, angry sound came from the crowd. "I call Alma," Miller said. Alma stepped forward. She did not look at Carver. She looked at the faces in the crowd, her neighbors. "I am not a woman for speeches," she said, her voice clear and strong. "So I will tell you what I saw. 3 nights ago, Keaton Yazzie brought 7 children to my door. In the dark, dying children. They were cold, and they were hungry, and they were running for their lives. Running from Mr. Carver's men, running because they had been threatened with guns for trying to go to school. The women in the crowd gasped. This was not about railroads. This was about children. And last night, Alma continued, he brought Tommy back after he and Miss Hart rescued him from that bridge. She pointed to Tommy, who sat in the front row. Tommy, Miller said, stand up, son. Tell them what you told me. Tommy stood, his hands shaking. He was just a boy. He looked at the crowd, then at Carver. The fear was in his eyes, but he held his ground. I worked for him, Tommy said, his voice just above a whisper. At the pump station, the one he built in secret, the one that is stealing Blue Spring. A roar of anger from the crowd. Carver surged to his feet. This is a lie. That boy is a thief. Sit down, Mr. Carver, Miller commanded, his hand on his pistol. Carver sat. He did not pay us, Tommy continued, his voice gaining strength. He trapped us. He said we owed him. When I tried to run, his man. He pointed at Red Jack. He taught me a lesson. The boy's hands went to his shirt, but he did not have to lift it. The crowd had seen the bruises. Keaton and Miss Hart, they found me. They saved me. And Mr. Carver is lying. He did not kidnap me. Red Jack did. He took me from the jail. He was going to put me on that train and ship me away so I could never talk. Another man stood up. One of the workers Keaton had freed from the depot. It is the truth, all of it. There were 12 of us, locked in that shed, waiting to be shipped off like cattle. We were his slaves. The foundation of the town was cracking. These were not rumors. These were their neighbors. A man at the back spoke. The agency representative. I can attest, by federal authority, that the Dine families have been protesting the water diversion for weeks. Mr. Carver's claim to Blue Spring is based on fraudulent surveys. The room was a powder keg. All it needed was the match. Miss Hart, Miller said. Evelyn stepped forward. She placed the roll of documents on the table. She was not a lawyer. She was a reporter. She would give them the facts. Mr. Carver told you he was bringing prosperity, she began, her voice clear and carrying, the Boston accent sharp in the rough, western room. He told you he was bringing water to your farms, in exchange for your land. She unrolled the first document, the original 1871 territorial survey map. This is the law. This map, from the United States government, clearly marks Blue Spring as public trust land. It belongs to all of you. It belongs to the people at the agency. It cannot be bought or sold. Mr. Carver did not buy it. He simply stole it. She let that sink in. Then she picked up the stack of deeds. He told you he was buying your land. Mr. Cole, Mr. Harrison, please step forward. The two ranchers, Miller's new deputies, walked to the table. This is a deed of sale for your property. Mr. Cole, she said. Is this your signature? She held it up. The dark, greasy smudge of the thumbprint was visible to the front rows. No, ma'am, Cole said, his voice shaking with rage. I told his men I would not sell. They came to my house. They said my wife would have an accident. They held my hand to that paper. They forced me. The crowd was on its feet, shouting. What about Miller? Someone yelled. What about the sheriff? All eyes went to Miller. The room went dead silent. Evelyn looked at Alma. Alma stepped forward and placed the black leather ledger on the table. Evelyn opened it. Her hand was steady. Mr. Carver was thorough. He did not just steal your water and your land, he bought your protection. She ran her finger down the page. To Judge Harris in the Capitol, $5,000, paid in gold, on the 10th of May. To... She paused, her eyes finding the entry. To Sheriff Miller, 1 farm mortgage, held by the Territorial Bank, paid in full, value $700. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of a man's life ending. Sheriff Miller looked at the faces of the people who had elected him, his friends. He slowly, deliberately, unpinned the silver star from his chest. He placed it on the table. "It is true," he said, his voice thick. "What she says is the truth. He bought me. He bought this badge. I took his help because I was a coward. I was afraid of losing my home." He looked at the crowd, his eyes meeting those of his neighbors. "I failed this town. I failed my office. I let this thief threaten you. I stood by and I let it happen. I am not fit to wear this." He looked at Keaton. "I am sorry." He had shamed himself, but in doing so, he had liberated the town. The back door of the town hall creaked open. A man stood there, his suit dark, clean, and utterly out of place. He was carrying a briefcase. "Pardon me," the man said, his voice crisp. "I am looking for Sheriff Miller. My name is Harlan. I am an attorney with the United States Department of the Interior." A new shockwave went through the room. A federal attorney. "I received a telegraph message 3 days ago," Harlan said, walking forward. He pulled the yellow paper from his pocket. "It was sent by a Miss Evelyn Hart. It made some very serious and, frankly, extraordinary claims about illegal water diversion, land fraud, and a Mr. Boone Carver. I came as fast as I could." He stopped at the table. His eyes scanned the map, the ledger, the deeds. He looked at Carver, who seemed to have shrunk inside his suit. "It appears," Harlan said, his voice cold, "that I do not need to investigate. I see the evidence is all here. The claims are not extraordinary. They are true." Carver's face crumpled. The last of his authority, the shield of his purchased law, was gone. He looked left. He looked right. He saw the angry faces of the ranchers. He saw the cold, hard stares of the workers he had enslaved. He saw the door. He bolted. He did not get 2 steps. The group of workers from the depot, who had been standing silently by the wall, simply stepped in front of him. They did not touch him. They did not raise a hand. They just formed a solid, unmoving wall of the men he had wronged. Carver stopped. There was nowhere to run. He looked at them, his eyes wide with the new, sudden terror of the powerless. He sagged, defeated, and 2 of the ranchers took his arms, guiding him back to the chair. Miller looked at his badge, still sitting on the table. Then, his hand steady, he picked it up and pinned it back onto his vest. He walked to Red Jack. "Get him on his feet." The deputies pulled Red Jack up. His hands still bound, he was being taken to the jail to wait for the federal marshal. As they walked him past Keaton, Red Jack stopped. He turned, his body stiff. He looked at Keaton, his eyes no longer filled with fire, but with a strange, dark understanding. "In the office," Red Jack rasped, his voice low. "With the knife. You had me. You could have done it." Keaton did not reply. He just stood, his side aching, and met the man's gaze. "You would not shoot," Red Jack whispered, almost to himself. "You would not kill. You know the line. You always knew the line. That is the only thing that separates us. It is why you won." He spat on the floor at Keaton's feet. The deputies dragged him away. It was the only concession to defeat he would ever make. Mr. Harlan, the attorney, raised his hand for silence. "By the authority of the United States government," he announced, "I declare the seizure of Blue Spring to be illegal. All associated injunctions are void. The water belongs to the people. The Silver Mesa Mining and Railroad Company will cease all operations, pending a full federal investigation. All labor contracts," he looked at Tommy, "are null and void. The company will pay full compensation to these men for their labor." A cheer, ragged and hoarse, went up. It was the sound of a town breathing again. Mr. Carver and his associate," Harlan continued, "will be transported to the Capitol to face federal charges." Harlan then looked at Keaton. and the warrant for Keaton Yazzie is hereby voided. It is clear to me, and to the law, that this man was not committing a crime. He was acting to prevent one. He turned to Sheriff Miller. Sheriff, this town has a deep wound. I've seen it all over the territory. A wound between your people and the Dine. It needs healing. It needs a bridge. The one Mr. Carver destroyed was made of wood. The one you need must be made of trust. Miller nodded. He understood. He looked across the room at Keaton, who was standing quietly, watching as he always did. He is right, Miller said, his voice carrying. This town, we have been blind. We have been suspicious. We need someone we can trust, someone who knows the land and knows the people, both people. He walked over to Keaton. He stood in front of him. Keaton, the town needs a liaison, a man to be the voice between Silver Mesa and the agency, to make sure this corruption never happens again. It is a paid position, funded by the county. I am asking you, will you take it? Keaton, Evelyn said softly. She was smiling, her eyes bright, the roll of maps held forgotten in her hand. Keaton looked at Miller's outstretched hand. He looked at the faces of the townspeople. They were not suspicious. They were not angry. They were waiting. They were hopeful. He looked at his great-aunt's words in his mind. The straight path. It was not running. It was not hiding. It was standing right here, in the center of it all. He took Sheriff Miller's hand. The trial was over, but the healing had just begun. The first of the early rains came, not as a violent storm, but as a soft, steady, soaking presence. For 3 days, it washed the red dust from the roofs of Silver Mesa. It scrubbed the soot from the air. It ran in clean rivulets down the wide, rutted Main Street, carrying away the last of the fear. And on the 4th day, the miracle happened. It started as a whisper at the town well. The bucket, when lowered, did not scrape the bottom with a hollow, thirsty sound. It landed with a soft, full splash. An hour later, a cheer went up from the high country. Blue spring was flowing. The water, clear and cold, pushed the mud and filth from its mouth and began to gurgle, then to sing, as it fed the dry creek beds. The land, which had held its breath in an agony of thirst, finally exhaled. Life returned with a sudden, joyful rush. The pastures, which had been brown and brittle, showed a faint, shy green. The Dine brought their sheep down from the high rocks, and their herds mixed with the ranchers' cattle at the public waterholes. The sound of children laughing, a sound that had been absent for months, was heard again by the creek. In the evenings, Alma's boarding house was no longer a fortress. It was a home. She had a piano, and someone was always playing it. The music, lively and hopeful, spilled out into the clean night air. Weeks later, Keaton, Black Horse Yazzie, and Evelyn Hart stood on the high, flat crest of Mesa Blanca. They were not fugitives, hiding in the shadows. They were two people, standing in the bright, clear sun. Below them, Silver Mesa looked small but whole, a neat, peaceful collection of buildings nestled in the greening valley. The scar from the warehouse fire was already being cleared, the foundations of a new, larger town hall being laid. Keaton had accepted the position. He now wore a simple silver star, not as a mark of authority over any one people, but as a symbol of his place between them. His side had healed, leaving a new scar. But this one felt different. It was not a mark of betrayal, but of sacrifice. Evelyn held a thick packet of paper, a manuscript. "It is finished," she said, her voice quiet, carried on the clean wind. "I am sending it to Boston tomorrow, on the new stage line." Keaton looked at the town. It is a long way for a story to travel. It is not just a story. Keaton, she said. She turned to him, her face serious. The wind pulled at her hair, which she no longer pinned back so tightly. "It is a record. It is not just about Carver. It is about the men he bought. It is about the law he twisted. It is about a whole system, thousands of miles away, that believes it can just take this article She tapped the paper. "Is not for Silver Mesa. It is for them. It is to change their minds, to make them see." He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands, the hands that had fought and tracked and held her. "My great-aunt says the straight path is the only one that does not lead back to the trap. You and I, we have been running in zigzags for a long time. It is good to stand still." Evelyn smiled. "I am not sure I know how to stand still. Boston is my home, but it does not feel like this. This land is hard." Keaton said, "It asks for everything. It takes your water, your strength, your certainty." "And what does it give back?" she asked. He looked at her. His dark eyes were no longer unreadable. They were open, clear. "It gives back the truth. It gives back who you really are." He turned his gaze back to the valley. "I am Dine. I am also the town's liaison. I am not one or the other. I am both." "And I," Evelyn said, stepping closer to him, "am a journalist from the East, but I am also the woman who fell off a roof and helped burn a bridge. I do not belong in a Boston drawing room anymore. I do not think I ever did." They stood side by side. Two people from different worlds, their roots exposed. They were not the same. They would never be. But they had grown toward the same light. "So, what is home?" she asked, her voice soft. Keaton did not answer with a place. He just turned and took her hand. His was rough, calloused, warm. Hers was smooth, strong. They fit together. They chose to stay. They would build their home here, on the straight path, together. That night, in the small, clean room Alma had given Evelyn at the boarding house, a single lamp burned. The window was open to the cool night air and the distant sound of the piano. They sat together on the simple rug, not like lovers in a novel, but like partners. They were reading her manuscript. Evelyn was reading aloud, her voice shaping the dry, factual account of fraud and greed into a powerful narrative of justice. Keaton sat beside her, his back against the wall. Listening, he would nod, or offer a correction, the proper Dine name for a place, the true meaning of a stolen prayer. She grew tired, her voice hoarse. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not stiffen. He accepted the weight of her, as he had accepted the weight of the town. He put his arm around her, and she continued to read. Her voice softer now, more intimate. His hand found hers, the one not holding the paper, and their fingers interlocked. It was a quiet, profound warmth, a silent promise. They were not just a warrior and a writer. They were a single, shared strength. The town healed. Sheriff Miller, his name cleared by his own confession, was re-elected in a landslide. His campaign promise was simple, and printed on a single sheet of paper, no more secrets. Alma, her boarding house now the true center of the town, had cleared out the old saloon, the one Carver had used for his meetings. She had filled it with benches and a blackboard. 3 days a week, she held a class. The children from the town sat beside the children from the agency. Tiana helped her teach. They were learning arithmetic, but they were also learning to read in 2 languages. They were learning each other's names. And Tommy, his bruises faded, was no longer a victim. He was an apprentice, the telegraph operator, the one who had helped Evelyn, had taken the boy under his wing. Tommy was smart, his fingers quick, and he understood the power of information. He sat at the key, his brow furrowed in concentration. Learning the language of the wire, he was becoming the town's eyes and ears, a legal and watchful guardian, ensuring Silver Mesa would never be cut off, never be lied to by the outside world again. He was the symbol of their future. The last of the rains came, washing the final traces of red dust from the land. The air was clean, sweet with the smell of new grass and wet sage. Keaton and Evelyn stood on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set. The wind, no longer a voice of threat, moved through the valley. It carried the faint, distant sound of a dying flute from the mesa, and it carried the sound of the piano from Alma's parlor. It carried the sound of laughter and the far-off, peaceful sound of horses moving toward home. They looked at each other, a man and a woman who had been forged in dust and fire. The time for running was over. The time for fighting was done. They stood together, in the open, and they were not afraid. Freedom, they had learned, was not just being free from chains. Freedom means looking at each other without fear. Thank you for listening to this story. Please let us all know in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales. Like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.